Challenges can be stepping stones or stumbling blocks. It's just a way of how we see them. We all face various challenges in our lives, and more often than not, we just blame the systems for it. That, the system is like that, and that is why we are having this problem. But what if we just turn around the table and try to be solution oriented at once, at least? Try to find a solution and try to see what skills we can use to navigate around those rough shores. So these are the inspirations that I got from my today's guest. And this and many more we'll be talking on my today's podcast. So hello everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Renaissance with Swati. And today I have with me a very dynamic women leader, Dr. Sirisha Kuchimanchi. Hi Sirisha, how are you?
I'm doing well, Swati. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, same here. So, Sirisha, you are also a podcast host. So, before we delve into your journey of life and being the founder of Sahita Technologies, I would like to ask you a question. How does it feel being on the other side of the table?
It's always exciting because, when you're preparing to be the one asking the questions, you're doing a lot more listening. I think it's different when you're doing a lot more of the
Right,
talking on the other side.
right, right. So, it's wonderful. So, you were born in India and then you went to the States for your master's and further studies, and then you settled in the States. So, would you like to tell more about your journey?
So I grew up in Madras, and I did my undergrad and master's in physics in India. And then I came to for my graduate school to Pittsburgh, to Carnegie Mellon, to get my master's. I switched
Okay.
fields. I went into engineering, material science.
Okay. Okay.
And as my master's finished, I started to work. And my work journey itself has been, you know, not a straight line. It's gone through various transitions. So we can
Okay.
talk about that in a bit more detail later. But I've worked over 20 plus years in the semiconductor industry, largely on the manufacturing side. I think there's a lot of conversation going on about it now. More people are
Right.
aware
Right.
of what the industry does. And currently, I don't work in corporate. I run my own strategic consulting firm for advanced manufacturing and workforce solutions. So it's been a transition, a little over 6 months to a year, and
Wow.
I'm totally enjoying the experience.
Wow. So how and when did you want, that, I want to own my own company. I want to be my own boss. And when did you decide to switch from a corporate to your own company, being the founder, being a women entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if there's like a moment in time. It's as a sort of soft transition into I want to try something different. Uh, had some constraints, I wanted more time and wanted to be able to pursue what I was interested in. So it sort of soft journeyed into that. And thinking of yourself as a businesswoman or an entrepreneur came much
Yeah.
later. I don't think
Okay.
that started out as this thing. It's just that, hey, I,
Okay.
I want to do something different. And it's gonna flip that way. But it is a learning curve. I
Wow.
mean, I know we always see the success stories, and people say overnight success, and there's
Right.
a saying which says overnight success takes a decade or more to build. Even if you're talking about Nvidia as an example, it took 30
Right.
years to
Right.
build it into the company it is.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
as much as it's overnight, there's a huge history behind it. So it's been a transition and a learning process, finding other founders who are in a similar journey. Having a support system, I think, is very important.
Right.
These are
Right.
very
Right.
challenging things to do on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to talk to someone every day, but having someone else experiencing some of the same things, I think, gives you
Nice.
a base to function out of.
So, like you said, that you face a lot of challenges when you open it, and there are a lot of things that go, when you're working in a company, you are getting a fixed paycheck at the end of the month. But when you own your own startup, then you have to be your own boss. That means you're owning the profits and losses. So, how does that feel? And, the stability.
Yeah, that I think is the hardest transition, right? For most. I mean, that's the question I get asked
Right,
often is that. So
right.
I would say there are a couple of ways. One is the revenue. Don't get me wrong. It's a huge part of what you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about. Once it took me a long time, and I don't know how many people, I don't know how much we discuss this to understand what it is that I even wanted to focus on. And it's still a journey.
Mm-hmm.
There are things I'm doing various things, and I enjoy all of them and may continue to do all of them or may focus on something else in the future. But it is a journey. It took a lot
Right.
of iterations to kind of land on the things. Like I had a call with a friend yesterday and she's like, how is this thing going? I said, okay. I couldn't remember which thing she was talking about. And I said, our conversation was many, many iterations ago.
Right.
It's kind of evolved into something else. So there is that profit and loss. And I think you have to, there's different ways. You can start with that being the main thing and working towards it aggressively, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or realizing that it will take time for the business to build. And
Right.
I think the other two things that I would tell anyone, and I think we might have touched on this briefly, is especially I see this with my female friends and colleagues about thinking about managing your own money becomes
Right.
very important. I think
Right.
that
Right.
gives you some kind of freedom and flexibility. And for me, the
Mm-hmm.
other thing was time was a constraint. So that became a bigger leverage at that point in time and
Right.
currently a
Right.
bit more. So
Right.
it's a trade-off of what is important, but definitely, yes, revenue, profit loss generation is a key part of it. And it's a learning process because when you're a business person, you're the
Right.
salesperson, you're the marketing, you're
Right. You are
everything. You don't
everything.
realize you're wearing these many hats,
Right.
but that is part of
Right.
it.
So, like you said, talking to your friend, there are many iterations before what she was talking about. So, similarly, I was talking to a friend today, and he was like, "I know you from 10 years back." It's like the Swati of 10 years back, but the Swati that I am after 10 years is much different version of what you met 10 years ago. So, a lot of iterations in our life happens that changes us for good, and it changes us sometimes our perspective towards life as well, what we want to do, what we want to be in life, what we are in life. Yeah.
Very true. I don't think I would have envisioned this or even a lot of my
Right.
career journey the way it turned out. And it's always interesting to meet friends or, cousins you saw many, many decades ago, and
Right.
they remember you as this version of yourself. I think that is
Right.
that is the most
Right.
extreme version of yourself, right? And how
Right.
you have changed, and
Right.
it's kind of mind-boggling to put the two pictures together.
Same.
And
Seriously.
that's so when I see that even with I'll use my kids as an example, right? When you're seeing a certain
Hmm.
iteration of them today, you know that
Right.
isn't going to be the version that a decade from now. So when we
Right.
stress a lot about it, it's like I think back, okay, I knew how I was as a kid, so there's no predicting what the future outcomes
Right.
are.
Right.
You can try and you should give it your best shot and you should continue
Right.
to like invest in it, but you don't know what the outcome will be. And I think that's part of the fun. There's no point knowing all the answers ahead of time.
Exactly. Exactly. You have to explore and experiment and adventure. And that is one difference that I find between, I think, India and rest of the countries, maybe states as well. That for Indian students, we always are, we have to go into science. But then there are no career fairs as such, what tells us, like it happens in the countries across, apart from India, that they organize career fairs that children can experiment, students can experiment what they want to do, which field they want to go. So would you like to talk about the career fairs thing?
Yeah, so oftentimes, there is a STEM challenge in the US. Actually, a lot less STEM students graduate here.
Mm-hmm.
Leaving aside the population
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
differences and that factorial, a lot less STEM students graduate in the US. They call it the leaky STEM pipeline because they
Okay.
don't have as many as they need to fill the job
Mm-hmm.
profiles in the future. And I was listening to the Indian Consul General in the US the other day, and he said India graduates 800,000 engineers a year, which is mind-boggling.
Right.
800,000, the US population is only like maybe 350 million at this point. So you can see how
Mm-hmm.
the numbers pan out.
Right.
And the the children or the students who may get exposed to career fair, not everyone does, is often through a camp. Uh,
Okay.
if their parents happen to be in the field and they have take your kids to work day and their parents
Okay.
work in a
Okay.
an
Okay.
engineering firm or something, they may see that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely when they are in university, they have career fairs. By then you've kind of decided a major. So it becomes very important for people to be exploring what it is. I think most of us,
Right.
fell into our careers various ways, right? It's hard to know everything that is out there. But there are people who will help have a conversation with you. Like
Right.
I had a conversation with these young men in high school yesterday. on,
Okay.
they're doing a startup, and I had done a TEDx talk on money and kids, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
wanted to talk to me because their ideas
Okay.
around financial
Right.
literacy.
Right.
But you never know what your thoughts are and who you talk to and who you'll intersect. So it's important to explore, but also
Right.
kids don't have the avenues to explore. So if you have a chance to meet somebody,
Mm-hmm.
we have to be very careful that we don't make it a lecture when we're having this, and it's really a conversation.
Right.
But I think that's kind of the doors it opens. And I
Nice.
know there's a huge push, and obviously there needs to be a huge push in India for figuring out how to employ this youth population that's, I think, like maybe 600 million
Right.
of youth.
Right.
And they are trying to figure that out, and there are avenues there, and that I think it's important to have those. So if people who are listening in your network are working already, any young people, maybe they go to university and have a
Mm-hmm.
chat with the students. That's the way it works. I mean, I've been a mentor many times in different
Okay.
situations. It's a
Okay.
continuously evolving process. Sometimes it's been through group settings, sometimes it's been
Right.
talk, sometimes it's one-on-one, someone reaches out,
Right.
and that's how it usually works out.
You rightly pointed out, mentoring is very important. Just keep on talking. Just keep on talking to your seniors. Just keep on talking to people in the industry so that you get a feel of, even if the career fairs are not there, but then you get a feel of what they are doing. You actually get to know what field you can go into. So that is very important. You're truly correct. And touching on TEDx talk that you just mentioned, I was listening to it yesterday that, you gave a TEDx talk and you focused on financial independence even in kids. So you talked about financial independence should be there in women, but then financial independence in kids as early as age 5. So would you like to talk more about that? How a small child aged 5 can understand financial independence and how he can use that for his future.
Yeah, because oftentimes we talk about financial literacy as young women or working adults, right? But a lot of habits come when you're a child. Your financial habits actually are learned very young. I think research might show even by like 10 or something, a lot of those are set because you've been
Okay.
imbibing what you see around you.
Okay.
So
Okay.
suddenly at 21, for me to wake up and suddenly figure out how to manage my money is a good thing, but there's steps we can take much ahead of time. So think about it. I mean, I know you have young kids, and I'm sure if you gave them, let's call it gems or M&M
Mm-hmm.
candies, and you
Right.
gave one 10 and one
Right.
12, even though they may not know how to count, they know that it's not fair. They
Right.
already understand concepts,
Right.
right? And when
Right.
you boil down money and math, though many of us struggle with it, and this anxiety and maybe even a mental block around it. It is simple math, right? There's only a couple
Right.
of concepts. There's addition,
Right.
subtraction, some multiplication, and compound interest. In its most basic form. I mean, there are more things to it. Obviously, that's why you have
Right.
quant and all
Right.
of this. But for
Right.
most of us, these are the concepts you just need to know.
Mm.
And so it starts with giving them an allowance. And I know there are different theories,
Right.
whether you pay them for chores or you just give them a flat allowance. You can teach them how to pay
Okay.
taxes out of that allowance, and
Right.
giving them the opportunity to make purchases. And that's kind of how it started with mine. They've
Wow.
worked with allowance, and they'd go to the store. And as a
Okay.
parent, I'll tell you, it's so much better because now there is no discussion about, can I get this in the store, can I get that. They have the
Right.
money. You don't have to
Right.
deal with it at the checkout, and they get to decide how they want to, and they'll make whatever purchases, whether you may think it's okay or right or
Right.
wrong. They will
Right.
figure out how much money they have over time and how they want to spend it.
I
And
think
so
that's a
it comes
wonderful
through
thing.
practice.
Right. Because children are very easily moldable, right? If we get to learn these things when we are children, that, the problems that financial independence in women, that will not come because they always knew how to be financially independent since their childhood. Because more often in societies, our parents try to help us a lot, just they just give you the money and you just spend it. But then we don't learn the value of money, the value of being financially independent.
True. And even the conversation, like I had with these young men yesterday, it was interesting that each one of them, when they told the story, talked about their dad teaching them the habits. So I had to actually ask if their mom also
Right.
was, working with them. And I
Right.
know their
Right.
parents do it together, but it
Mm-hmm.
is something if you instill sort of the confidence of it early on, be it young men, women, or,
Exactly.
either one of them.
Exactly.
But the ability to give that confidence really helps, because life is, when you're working, we're often
Right.
focused on career progression.
Right.
But we also work to
Absolutely.
make money. We started with that conversation. You asked me, I'm running a business,
Hmm.
I'm running a profit
Right.
loss. We work
Right.
to make money, right? Because
Right.
we,
Right.
we define a certain life and a lifestyle.
Hmm.
At some point, I want the money to work for me. I shouldn't constantly be working for it.
Of
And if
course.
I
Of
don't
course.
let the money do some of its job, then I'm always indebted to working for it. And it doesn't give me the freedom of choice that I would like at some
Right.
point.
Right.
I mean, there might be
Exactly.
certain circumstances that people don't have the choice. I get that.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
assuming you have some recourse and you're managing that, you want that to work for you. You don't want to be tied to it and tethered in a way. So how
Right.
can you get it to work? And I mean, the reality of life is women, live much longer lives. At some point, you're going to manage your money. And I'd say learn to manage it early and not when challenging circumstances hit you, because you're already probably
Right.
extremely stressed
Right.
and you don't
Right.
want to have learned that. And I hear like a lot of stories from different people and friends, and it is a very hard thing.
Understood. I can totally understand. And that is why being financially independent is important, because when challenges come into your way, then if you're financially independent, you will be in a much better position to, come out of it if you're financially independent, if you have the finances with you. And I think that applies to everyone, right? Male, females, or the elderly, or anyone, if you talk about it, right?
Very true.
Mm.
And I just want to define what financial independence means. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have the money to retire today or tomorrow.
Okay.
That is your eventual goal. Obviously, you're in different stages of life.
Mm-hmm.
You've just started working, you're not
Right.
anywhere near.
Right.
But the idea of thinking about how you manage your lifestyle doesn't mean you give up on the joys that you have. Maybe it's a trip that you're taking, or
Right.
a restaurant you
Right.
want to eat at, or
Right.
buy a gift to a friend or a parent,
Right.
whatever it might be. But you have an underlying thread of some of those decisions are conscious, and that the money is not
Right.
just flowing in and out,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Because at some
Totally.
point in the future, you need that. And for anyone thinking about it, just pull up a compound interest calculator and
Yep.
just do a simple exercise. I think
Right.
it's eye opening. Say
Right.
you put 500 rupees a month
Mm-hmm.
for the next 40 years at 6% interest,
Right.
uh, starting with 1,000 rupees. So basically, you have 1,000 bank balance, and you're putting
Right.
6,000 into the account.
Right.
And at 6% over 40 years, I think you make something around 900K. The
Exactly.
same
Yep.
thing, you start a
Right.
decade later.
Right.
Only 30 years you have now. You make about half that. Not that it's always going to be half. I mean, it depends. The
Right.
numbers don't always
Right.
come out like that.
Right. Right.
But you need to do that to see what that means, why it becomes important to invest and let the money do its job as well. And how you invest and all, that's a personal decision. But
Exactly.
you have to think about it, like you said, because people are in different stages, and it gives you the option to make an intentional decision. Like I was a stay-at-home mom for a few
Mm-hmm.
years, and that was also a financial decision, right? I mean,
Okay.
it's not that we were
Mm-hmm.
financially independent, but it
Right.
was a
Right.
decision saying, okay, this is how we are going to manage to make this transition work for us.
Okay. That's a wonderful advice, being finance, and that's a wonderful financial advice. Be it any form of investment you are choosing, but at least do something about it. Do think about it, so that if you are in such a situation, you have enough financial independence that you can do what you want to do. So mentioning about, like you said, that you took a gap of a few years, you went on a career break, right? So how did it feel like when you come back? Because generally, for example, even in maternity, when we go on career breaks and returning, sometimes it's very difficult, right? Sometimes you think that you've lost your edge because you're out of touch for some time. And gaining back the momentum takes some amount of time, right? So how does it feel for you, when you went on a career break?
So I, we talked about this briefly yesterday when we were, catching up. So it was actually my second one. I'd gone through a layoff less than a year
Mm.
after I started working. So that
Okay.
itself is a bit
Right.
scary in a way. But that time I'd got called back from my customer asking if I wanted to come to work. And essentially how my second career break worked out is, as I was looking for jobs, I got a call from my company asking if I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to return to work.
Right.
So what I realized on hindsight, obviously you don't have that,
Right.
insight when you're doing it,
Right.
is I didn't have the vocabulary for it then, was like, I guess the network you had built, the work you had done you were talking about how people remember you.
Right.
So
Right.
there is this saying that you're kind of locked in their memory. So those are the things that they tap into to reach
Right.
out,
Right.
because that's what
Right.
happens. And for me, actually, the career break turned out to be a good thing.
Wow.
Both times, I will say, because it really changed my risk tolerance. I mean, for me, wanting to try the, entrepreneurship, I think is
Right.
stems from the fact that you have done, you've gone through these transitions and they've worked out well. Not when you're going through it. I mean, let me not
Right.
make it sound that
Right.
it's not scary, traumatic, and when you don't know what's going to
Right.
happen, that
Right.
it's
Right.
smooth. But I'm telling you, after, because we don't talk about after a decade
Right.
after, or 2 decades
Right.
after,
When you
it
look
turned out to
back.
be a good thing because my risk tolerance changed. I was in a way a bit more ambitious when I came back to work. I also realized how I managed my time better. I mean, if
Right.
you have,
Right.
other responsibilities or other things that you spend time on, be it a parent, caregiving, or
Right.
maybe you have, side hustle or a hobby, you're going to manage your time, or whichever way. So it became a much more curated way of managing
Right.
it. And
Mm-hmm.
also in some ways, I started to ask for what I want. I mean, that took time to
Okay.
get into it, but I
Mm-hmm.
started to be more vocal about what I wanted to do.
And that is
Whether
so
it worked or
important.
not is a wholly different
Right.
question, but
Right.
I've realized, okay, what is the risk that I would take and what is the worst
Mm-hmm.
that would happen? And having had breaks, I'm like, okay, you've already stepped out of the
Right.
office.
Right.
So it can't be any different than that if something were to go wrong.
Right. That's wonderful advice. You are ready to take the risk and you become like I faced this once, I can face it again. So, talking about this, Sirisha, in today's market, when it is so fragile that people are being fired and, like you said, layoffs. So, what advice would you like to give to people? Like you said to me, that challenges, like life is a snake and ladders game, that you are on the top one day and a snake bites and you come down. So, what advice would you like to give to people, who are getting laid off in this fragile industry right now?
Yeah, so obviously, if you're going through it, you're having a hard time of it,
Right,
most likely.
right.
What I would say is find a support network, find friends, find family, because you need someone to talk to. So don't be
Yes.
isolated in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, because a layoff, and what we have to realize is, I mean, yes, because it impacts us financially, right? You might be
Mm-hmm.
in a situation where you cannot obviously afford to be laid off
Exactly.
at all.
Right.
But a layoff really has nothing to do with us, right? It's a financial transaction that a company has decided because of economic
Right.
and its own
Right.
decisions. So it's we shouldn't feel that it has anything to do with our performance. So first, that's the thing to realize. It's nothing to do
And
with
believe in
us. It's
yourself.
out of our
Yeah.
control. But now
Mm.
we have to figure out how to navigate this. So for people who are looking at it, or who actually, statistics show that, a significant portion of people will experience a layoff in their career. So it's better to be like, have this sort of toolbox around. So start thinking of what you want to do, what skills you have. I mean, it's a good point if you have some space to think about what you actually want to spend time on. You may not have the luxury of it and you might have to jump
Right.
back, but
Right. Right.
it might be
Right.
a good pivot point, because that's kind of what's happened for me. And see what skills you have that are transferable. Because oftentimes when industries have layoffs, they all have it at the
Right.
same time.
Right.
So you can't
Exactly.
jump into a companion
Mm-hmm.
company or a partner
Mm-hmm.
company, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're going to struggle with that.
So yeah, when the challenges come, when you're fired, when you're laid off, then you have to believe in yourself, and you have to have that toolbox around, right?
Yeah, so that's when I think the threads start to come. That's why, when I have family or friends or other young people, that's why I talk about finance as an underlying thread, because you need
Right.
some buffer to manage. And you may or may not have, maybe you have student loans,
Right.
you have
Right.
EMI for something else. So obviously there are a lot of push and pulls, but having a support, thinking about skills, and maybe in the meantime, it's not a full job you get, Maybe you
Okay.
do a side project with
Mm-hmm.
somebody,
Mm-hmm.
you work out in a small firm. There are tools like
Mm-hmm.
Fiverr and TaskRabbit and stuff. Maybe you
Right.
have skills
Right.
that you can sort of
Right.
side hustle for an hourly thing,
Right.
work on a project. So
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about my podcast. So I would
Right.
tell people to go listen to my podcast. The first,
Right.
I think, 6 episodes. The first one actually starts with us talking about layoff. This was
Okay.
before they talked about layoffs on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Nobody talked
Okay.
about it. So we
Okay.
started the
Okay.
a friend who was guest hosting with me, Usha and I started with layoffs as the first one. And then the next few episodes talk about what are the alternate ways, how do you
Right.
come back to work
Right.
successfully.
Right.
There are a lot of resources out there. There are companies that have returnship programs. If it's not a layoff,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Okay.
There are
Okay.
different resources available
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
organizations do. I'd say take a listen to that because there's already a curated list that you can try, and probably there are much, much more. I'm talking about this from 3 years. And
Wow.
reach out
Right.
to your network. The most important thing to do is to tell your network what you're looking for, what you're doing, what is happening, because they're the people who can help you. It can be somebody
Absolutely.
from
Yeah.
your
Right.
community, your friend circle. They might have somebody who needs
Absolutely.
help.
Right. 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 And that is the reason, having a strong network is so, so important. Often we ignore that. Often you cross out of, the grad schools or the colleges. You are just like that. We are in our own zone. We are in our own industries. But having that network alive, that keeps you sorted. And if you face any struggle, then that is a network that will help you come out of it. So having a strong
Very true.
network is very, very important. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, you cannot underscore. And to clarify, network does not mean it's a transactional relationship. It's a relationship you have with
Right,
somebody.
right,
You're not
right,
using it to leverage
right,
for just your gain. It comes in handy for information or connecting you with somebody. I mean, we connected
right,
on this
right,
podcast because I
right,
think if I recollect, I think your husband had posted, and then
right,
somebody in my network
right,
posted saying, we should connect on a
right,
podcast. So it
right.
comes in various forms, and it's more about an introduction. And
Seriously.
one of the best ways is to find people, like I'll give the examples in the US. If you
Mm-hmm.
kid plays soccer in the soccer field, or maybe you go to church or temple or
Right,
wherever,
right,
your
right,
network, you have various different networks. And you're just having a conversation. You're not
right,
necessarily asking for
right,
something because that always puts
right,
people off necessarily. But just telling them, hey, this is what I'm up to, this is what I'm doing. And especially if you build this over time, just general chit chat, then
right,
you
right,
realize, like,
right,
I have a great group of school friends. We connected over
right.
COVID. And through them, and it's not like we are asking for, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we ask, or we put out things saying, hey,
Right,
let me know about this or that.
right,
But they have connected me with people that sometimes I don't know if I necessarily asked, sometimes I might have asked, but
right,
they have thought, oh, you're doing this, you should talk to this person. And that's led to a
right.
different kind of
Exactly,
conversation, different kind
exactly.
of relationship.
When I was building this podcast and I was looking at the first few guests, whom should I invite? I reached out to my network of school friends and college friends and my corporate friends. And one after the other, they led me to other people, you're doing this. Okay, I'll give you this contact person. So, like you said, that how I reached you. Similar fashion, I reached a lot of people whom I didn't even know. But through my contacts of my schools and my colleges, I reached out to those people and I'm growing my network every day.
Very good. That's excellent. I mean, that's what you want to do. And you
Right,
may not have time to invest in all of those conversations at all times. Some you pick up,
exactly.
some might fizzle out over time, some might reconnect,
Right, right.
but it's a learning process.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, I would like to touch upon one more topic, yeah, right? Women in leadership, because we often see that women somewhere lag behind due to their career breaks or due to anything, lag behind in the leadership. But you being a women leader, how did you achieve that? How did you gain that? Because we see very few women in leadership, and it is growing. Obviously, it is growing day by day. But then, how do you see the transition? And where it is lacking and what can we do about it?
I mean, the challenge that often comes, right? Let's
Mhm.
put it up front, is you have more than one job, not just a job you go to work at. It's this job at home too. And
Right,
and we all know that it's not necessarily equally balanced in most
right,
cases. So
right,
first acknowledging that we understand that. as much as we talk about it, there is
Mm-hmm.
nothing called work-life balance. I think
Exactly.
most people acknowledge that balance does not exist. It's more a choice.
Right.
So something has to give,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to decide what that give is and what you can
Right.
be
Right.
okay with. So that is one part of it. The other part that I tell people is once you have some clarity, or maybe you don't always have
Mm-hmm.
clarity on what you want
Right.
to do, you have to start talking to, say, in a corporate, you're
Mm-hmm.
talking to your boss, but you need to be having conversations at least once a quarter with your boss's boss. They call them STIP
Right.
conversations,
Right.
because your boss cannot hire you as their peer, assuming you want to
Exactly.
be a manager. So
Exactly.
they cannot hire
Exactly.
you to be their peer, right? I mean, their boss has to make the decision. And the more people you
Exactly.
know, this is why it becomes important, not just to network, but when you're having these conversations, you're talking
Right.
about what you're working on, what ideas you
Exactly.
have, what impact you're having, because it comes down to essentially hitting the bottom line, some metrics that are
Mm.
key or some
Mm.
priorities that you're having an impact. So if, and then, you get projects and other
Mm-hmm.
things, but you
Right.
have to
Right.
ask, and assuming that your manager knows what you want is does not work. I mean,
Right.
this is from my experience, and I've talked to a lot of, outside my podcast, inside my podcast, and just with colleagues and senior leaders.
Right.
Every one of them has had a point where they assumed they were going to get the next role. It was very obvious to them because they were
Right.
the best
Right.
candidate. But
Right.
it's oftentimes turned out that they didn't get it. And then they realized when they talked to their boss that they were
Mm-hmm.
never under consideration because they never knew they were even interested in that role. You may have known, maybe
Right.
your higher
Right.
management have known,
Right.
maybe they
Right.
left. So this is
Speak it
this is
out.
the way I
Basically,
simply say
yeah.
no one can
Right.
read your mind. So you have to express what you want. And I know sometimes people may not have supportive managers
Right.
and others, and you need to expand your network because you don't have to just move vertically. There are so many other avenues in your
Right.
organization or outside your
Right.
organization.
Right. Right.
So it becomes important to tell people, hey, this is what I do. This is, what I'm
Right.
doing. This is other
Right.
ideas I might have. Maybe you don't want to do what you're doing, but you've read some research or you've seen something
Mm-hmm.
they're working on and you
Right.
have some
Right.
suggestions. And if they see that, you can do
Mm-hmm.
things, then you'll get potentially tapped on the
Exactly.
shoulder and take the risk of applying for the jobs. I mean, you're never going to know unless you apply. I mean, I've
Exactly.
talked to a lot of
Unless you
people
explore. Yeah.
for different jobs, sometimes thrown my name in the hat when people are wondering why it
Mm.
was in the hat.
Right.
But it's led
Right.
to really good conversations because one of the times that I did it, I think the managers didn't know I was even looking for that kind of role. So first of all, it was in, insightful for them.
Right.
And
Right.
I didn't
Right.
get the job, but what I got
Right.
was good feedback. So they came and gave me feedback, which actually
Wow.
became incredibly critical.
Wow.
But you have to be
Wow.
receptive to the feedback. Feedback is very hard
Mm.
to take.
Mm.
Nobody wants to
Mm.
hear it. I mean, let's be
Exactly.
frank, no one wants to hear any feedback.
Right.
But
Right.
it's very important. Whether you choose to act on it, you agree on it, that is your decision. But at least listen to it because that is an external perception of you that may not be what you think you
Exactly.
are representing
Exactly.
yourself as. So
Yeah, because sometimes who you think you are, and sometimes the people you're working with, your managers, your supervisors, they understand you and your working style, and then they give you feedback. And that feedback is important because that gives you a chance to improve upon yourself. And like you said, skip the ladder also sometimes and reach out to people, talk about yourself, show your narrative. Because unless you talk about it, unless you speak it out, nobody will be able to guess that, this and this person has this in this category. So yes, speak it out. Yeah.
exactly, because oftentimes, being on the side of speaking for myself or managing people,
Mm-hmm.
we always look at the person in our organization as the
Right.
person doing that job now. Especially if they work 20 years, they have this whole slew of experience we completely ignore. So it's
Right.
important for you to
Right.
understand where they come from and what they bring to the table. So you're not just pigeonholing that person. As a manager,
Exactly.
you're making
Exactly.
sure that you give them avenues to grow, you empower them. And
I think
the
so.
more you
Yeah.
tell the narrative, the more comfortable it becomes. Because I think for me at least that is, and I hear this from other people from other cultures, and I'm sure it's changing across the globe, is you weren't taught to talk about yourself. It wasn't considered a good thing to talk
Right.
about yourself. But you
Right.
have to do it in a
Right.
way that's comfortable to you and that you are okay with doing it. And the more conversations you have with people,
Right. Right.
you, because in the end, opportunities happen through sponsorship, meaning somebody's
Right.
talking about you when you're not in the
Exactly.
room. And
Exactly.
they can't talk about you if they don't know what you did. And it
Right.
doesn't have to be just skip level. I mean, I would interact with my bosses, colleagues, or I would tell my own team, you need to be talking to my
Right.
colleagues, my,
Exactly.
other managers, because
Mm.
if you're not, come a ranking time, come this time, I will advocate and I will push. But the
Right.
more people in the network are going to support saying, yes, this person did this, you know,
Right. Right.
Swati was doing this, and someone else can
Right.
also vouch for it,
Right.
then it becomes stronger because it's not just
Agreed.
because everyone is going to vouch for their team. The more
Right.
people you have
Right.
externally also
Right.
vouching, then the
Right.
stronger the credibility goes. And those are the people who might say, oh, we should use, think of her for this project. Then you have
Right.
more people speaking about it.
Right.
So think
Completely
of it from that
resonate.
standpoint.
Yeah, completely resonate because everyone is competing in this world, and if you have people you who are pushing you and who are supporting you, that yes, this person. So, for example, Sirisha or Swati has this caliber. The more the number of people who are supporting you, who are backing you, who know your caliber, the more you have the chances of success in this world. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one more thing I would add to that is if someone taps you for an opportunity and says, hey, I think you should take this promotion, this leadership, think hard and fast about it before you say no. You can say
Okay.
no, but it has to be, I would say, a good justification for yourself and maybe even sometimes for your boss and why you're sort of
Mm-hmm.
turning down the opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you've
Right.
expressed interest in growth and then you turn down the growth opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Because two reasons. If you're turning it down because it doesn't fit with your plans, that is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you have other
Mm.
responsibilities
Right.
and
Right.
maybe in 2 years you have the time. Then that's okay. Or other reasons. But if you're turning it down because you think you're not a good fit or you're not ready
Mm.
for it, then I would say don't ever do that. Because the way I look at it is if someone taps you, first of all, they've used their social capital to get
Right.
you the job.
Exactly.
So that is
Exactly.
one thing. Secondly, even if you think you're not ready for it, they see something in you that you don't see in
Right.
yourself.
Right.
So that is already a plus. And secondly, having them pitched for you, they're going to have
Right.
your back. They're going to
Exactly.
support you to try to make
Exactly.
you as successful as possible. And even if you fail miserably at it, let's say it doesn't
Right.
work out.
Right.
The way I think of it is going back to the toolbox. I got to learn new skills. I got to do, say, a team lead that I never got to do. So I
Right.
learned how this is.
Right.
I also
Right.
learned whether I like it or not. Maybe I didn't like it and I don't want to do it. It was just a
Yeah.
dream, but it's not
Right.
something that I like.
Right.
It
Right.
also, whether it gave me a title is one thing. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing is it also opened my access to a network that I didn't have before because I'm sitting at a
Right.
different table.
Right.
Also, at
Right.
that table, different conversations are going on that I didn't have privy to before.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all things that happen when you try different things. I mean, each one of
Yes,
the
of course.
roles that I had to take, stepping stones, you don't know how it's going to go, but
Right.
those are the things
Right.
you'll sort of learn along the way.
And just like you said, if someone is tapping you, someone is realizing your potential, just think before you say no, because they might be seeing something in you which today you're not able to see, but maybe tomorrow you'll be able to see. Yeah.
Exactly.
So Sirisha, we have talked a lot about profession and how we should be looking at opportunities. Now I want to ask you, you are a famous podcaster and you did it for 3 years and you did so much successful episodes. And even when I look at your podcast, it really, even my husband says that, look at this podcast, it will inspire you a lot. So any advice or inspiration for people like me who are just doing podcasting as a passion right now, and what should we be delving into? And given a chance, would you like to come back to podcasting?
I will come back into podcasting in some other form, fit or fashion in the future.
Right.
Probably that's the game because I so enjoy doing it.
Right.
Just
Right.
the ability to meet so many people, ask so many questions, learn from them, and
Right.
have a
Right.
conversation is totally empowering and enlightening.
Right. Right.
So I would say to you or whoever else is you have to decide what the podcast is for you. For me, it was a sort of a volunteer and a passion project. And that's
Right.
kind of how it like how I sort of went into hiatus with it and ended it. If it's a thing that is part of your business, then it's a whole different way of
Of
looking at
course.
podcasting,
Of
right? It
course.
depends on how it fits into your thing. So
Right. Right.
deciding which way the podcast does. And there are podcast network support community. So I sit on the board of governors of the Podcast Academy. So it has mentoring, it has webinars. It's a community
Wow.
that supports other podcasters, indie
Wow.
podcasters. It has big companies like Wondery and other ones as part of it. It also supports the Ambies, which is like these awards that people can nominate.
Right.
So there are
Right.
communities like that.
Right.
There are communities in the US like BIPOC podcasters on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
There is OSA Collective, which is for women podcasters.
Okay.
So find a community, because podcasting, I realized very early on, is a very lonely business. Because oftentimes, yes, you have a guest on the other and you're having a
Right.
conversation and you're totally
Right.
enjoying it. But the
Right.
rest of the time, you are sitting in a room most of the time,
Right.
having a conversation with somebody that you might
Right.
meet one time. Maybe you'll keep up the relationship, but that's not always guaranteed.
Right.
And you need a
Right.
community of other people, because most of the time, many of us who podcasted have no idea of the medium, don't have any of the skills before we started,
Exactly.
and you're
Exactly.
learning everything. So I went to a podcast conference a year after I started, when I found out it was locally in my city. So that is when it turned out to be a lot of fun. That's how I ended up on the board and stuff, is
Right.
meeting other podcasters. And there's a huge community. So
Okay.
find other podcasters in your city,
Right.
put a meetup or wherever in India, maybe on a WhatsApp. Find them, have a meetup. Maybe they have an official conference. Even if they don't have, even if you meet 5 people, you may be
Right.
talking about nothing of the same
Right.
stuff, but you can
Exactly.
talk about mic, or you can talk about how hard it is to edit, or have a guest, or
Exactly.
distribution, whatever it is.
Right.
But find a
Right.
community so it doesn't make it lonely. And it goes back to that support, because you learn something. I mean, I learned a lot of things from each of them, whether it's the tools I used or how to do certain things. And if you want to monetize it and generate revenue, then there are like different avenues, whether you put an ad or you get a
Mm-hmm.
sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
So you can then work on that as well, and distribution as you look at it.
That's a wonderful advice, even if, like, for example, I'm doing it for my passion, but even for those who are doing it as a business, having community around, having people to talk about, learning about different techniques they can use, different tools they can use, and, talking about, like you said, how much time it is taking me to edit it, how much time I'm spending in a small room alone with myself and talking to people, that really helps. So that's a wonderful advice, Sirisha. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being my guest and accepting my offer to be on my podcast. It really means a lot. I'm really
It
grateful
was
for that.
wonderful, Swati. Wish you the best. And I'm sure it's going to go gangbusters on your podcast. So wish you the
Thank,
best. And thank you for having me on your show as
thank
well.
you. Thank you so much, Sirisha. It was wonderful. Have a good day. Thank you.